Kahlil Gibran, the voice of the Master. I came to say a word, and I shall say it now. But if death prevents me, it will be said by tomorrow, for tomorrow never leaves a secret in the book of eternity. I came to live in the glory of love and in the light of beauty, which are the reflections of God. I am here living, and I cannot be exiled from the domain of life, for through my living word I will live in death. I came here to be for all and with all, and what I do today in my solitude will be echoed tomorrow by the multitude. What I say now with one heart will tomorrow be thousands of hearts. The voice of the Master. Part 1. The Master and the Disciple. Chapter 1. The Master's Journey to Venice. And it came to pass that the disciple saw the Master walking silently to and fro in the garden, and signs of deep sorrow showed upon his pale face. The disciple greeted the Master in the name of Allah, and inquired after the cause of his grief. The Master motioned with his staff, and bade the disciple seat himself on the rock by the fish pond. The disciple did so, and made ready to listen to the Master's story. Said the Master, "You desire me to tell you of the tragedy which memory reenacts every day and night upon the stage of my heart. You are weary of my long silence and my unspoken secret, and you are troubled by my sighs and lamentations. To yourself you say, if the Master will not admit me into the temple of his sorrows, how shall I ever enter into the house of his affections? Hearken to my story. Listen, but do not pity me. For pity is intended for the weak, and I am still strong in my affliction. From the days of my youth I have been haunted, waking and sleeping, by the phantom of a strange woman. I see her when I am alone at night, sitting by my bedside. In the midnight silence I hear her heavenly voice. Often when I close my eyes, I feel the touch of her gentle fingers upon my lips, and when I open my eyes, I am overcome with dread, and suddenly begin listening intently to the whispered sounds of nothingness. Often I wonder, saying to myself, is it my fancy that sets me spinning until I seem to lose myself in the clouds? Have I fashioned from the sinews of my dreams a new divinity with a melodious voice and a gentle touch? Have I lost my senses, and in my madness have I created this dearly loved companion? Have I withdrawn myself from the society of men and the clamor of the city so that I might be alone with the object of my adoration? Have I shut my eyes and ears to life's forms and accents so that I might the better see her and hear her divine voice? Often I wonder, am I a madman who is content to be alone, and from the phantoms of his loneliness fashions a companion and spouse for his soul? I speak of a spouse, and you marvel at that word. But how often are we puzzled by some strange experience which we reject as impossible, but whose reality we cannot efface from our minds, try as we will? This visionary woman has indeed been my spouse, sharing with me all the joys and sorrows of life. When I awake in the morning, I see her bending over my pillow, gazing at me with eyes glowing with kindness and maternal love. She is with me when I plan some undertaking, and she helps me bring it to fulfillment. When I sit down to my repast, she sits with me and we exchange thoughts and words. In the evening, she is with me again, saying, "We have tarried too long in this place. Let us walk in the fields and meadows." Then I leave my work and follow her into the fields, and we sit on a high rock and gaze at the distant horizon. She points to the golden cloud and makes me aware of the song the birds sing before they retire for the night, thanking the Lord for the gift of freedom and peace. Many a time she comes to my room when I am anxious and troubled, but no sooner do I spy her than all care and worry are turned to joy and calm. When my spirit rebels against man's injustice to man, I see her face amidst those other faces I would flee from. The tempest in my heart subsides and is replaced by the heavenly voice of peace. When I am alone and the bitter darts of life stab at my heart and I am chained to the earth by life's shackles, I behold my companion gazing at me with love in her eyes, and sorrow turns to joy, and life seems an Eden of happiness. You may ask, how can I be content with such a strange existence? And how can a man like myself, in the springtime of life, find joy in phantoms and dreams? But I say to you, the years I've spent in this state are the cornerstone of all that I have come to know about life, beauty, happiness, and peace. For the companion of my imagination and I have been like thoughts freely hovering before the face of the sun, or floating on the surface of the waters, singing a song in the moonlight, a song of peace that soothes the spirits and leads it towards ineffable beauty. Life is that which we see and experience through the Spirit, but the world around us we come to know through our understanding and reason. And such knowledge brings us great joy or sorrow. It was sorrow I was destined to experience before I reached the age of 30. Would that I have died before I attained the years that drained my heart's blood and my life's sap, and left me a withered tree with branches that no longer move in the frolicsome breeze, and where no birds build their nests. The master paused, and then, seating himself by his disciple, continued. 20 years ago, the governor of Mount Lebanon sent me to Venice on a scholarly mission, with a letter of recommendation to the mayor of the city, whom he had met in Constantinople. I left Lebanon on an Italian vessel in the month of Nisan. The spring air was fragrant as, and the white clouds hung in above horizon like so many lovely paintings. How shall I describe to you the exaltation I felt during this journey? Words are too poor and too scant to express the inmost feeling in the heart of man. The years I spent with my ethereal companion were filled with contentment and joy and peace. I never suspected that pain lay in wait for me, or that bitterness lurked at the bottom of my cup of joy. As the carriage bore me away from my native hills and valleys and towards the coast, my companion sat by my side. She was with me during the 3 joyful days I spent in Beirut, roaming the city with me, stopping where I stopped, smiling when a friend accosted me. When I sat on the balcony of the inn overlooking the city, she joined me in my reveries. But when I was about to embark, a great change swept over me. I felt a strange hand seizing hold of me and pulling me back, and I heard a voice within me whispering, "Turn back. Do not go. Turn back to the shore before the ship sets sail." I did not heed that voice. But when the ship hoisted sail, I felt like a tiny bird that had suddenly been snatched between the claws of a hawk and was being borne aloft into the sky. In the evening, as the mountains and hills of Lebanon receded on the horizon, I found myself alone at the prow of the ship. I looked around for the woman of my dreams, the woman my heart loved, the spouse of my days, but she was no longer at my side. The beautiful maiden whose face I saw whenever I gazed at the sky, whose voice I heard in the stillness of the night, whose hand I held whenever I walked the streets of Beirut, was no longer with me. For the first time in my life, I found myself utterly alone on a boat sailing the deep ocean. I paced the deck, calling to her in my heart, gazing on the waves in the hope of seeing her face. But all in vain. At midnight, when all the other passengers had retired, I remained on deck alone, troubled and anxious. Suddenly, I looked up and I saw her, the companion of my life, above me in a cloud, a short distance from the prow. And I leapt with joy. I opened my arms wide and cried out, "Why have you forsaken me, my beloved? Where have you gone? Where have you been? Be near me now, and never leave me alone again." She did not move. On her face I descried signs of sorrow and pain, and something I had never seen before. Speaking softly and in sad tones, she said, "I have come from the depths of the ocean to see you once more. Now go down to your cabin and give yourself over to sleep and dreams." And having uttered these words, she became one with the clouds and vanished. Like a hungry child, I called to her frantically. I opened my arms in all directions, but all they embraced was the night air, heavy with dew. I went down to my berth, feeling within me the ebb and flow of the raging elements. It was as if I were on another boat altogether, being tossed on the rough seas of bewilderment and despair. Strangely enough, as soon as I touched my pillow, I fell fast asleep. I dreamt, and in my dream I saw an apple tree shaped like a cross, and hanging from it as if crucified was the companion of my life. Drops of blood fell from her hands and feet upon the falling blossoms of the tree. The ship sailed on day and night, but I was as though lost in a trance, not certain whether I was a human being sailing to a distant clime or a ghost moving across the cloudy sky. In vain I implored Providence for the sound of her voice, or a glimpse of her shadow, or the soft touch of her fingers on my lips. 14 days passed, and I was still alone. On the 15th day at noon, we sighted the coast of Italy at a distance, and at dusk we entered the harbor. A throng of people in gaily decorated gondolas came to greet the ship and convey the passengers to the city. The city of Venice is situated on many small islands close to one another. Its streets are canals, and its numerous palaces and residences are built on water. Gondolas are the only means of transportation. My gondolier asked me where I was going, and when I told him to the mayor of Venice, he looked at me with awe. As we moved through the canals, night was spreading her black cloak over the city. Lights gleamed from the open windows of palaces and churches, and their reflection in the water gave the city the appearance of something seen in a poet's dream, at once charming and enchanting. When the gondola reached the junction of two canals, I suddenly heard the mournful ringing of church bells. Though I was in a spiritual trance and far removed from all reality, the sounds penetrated my heart and depressed my spirits. The gondola docked and tied up at the foot of marble steps that led to a paved street. The gondolier pointed to a magnificent palace set in the middle of a garden and said, "Here is your destination." Slowly I climbed the steps leading to the palace, followed by the gondolier carrying my belongings. When I reached the gate, I paid him and dismissed him with my thanks. I rang, and the door was opened. As I entered, I was greeted by the sounds of wailing and weeping. I was startled and amazed. An elderly servant came toward me and in a sorrowful voice asked me what was my pleasure. "Is this the palace of the mayor?" I inquired. He bowed and nodded, and I handed him the missive given to me by the governor of Lebanon. He looked at it and solemnly walked to the door leading to the reception room. I turned to a young servant and asked the cause of the sorrow that pervaded the room. He said that the mayor's daughter had died that day, and as he spoke he covered his face and wept bitterly. Imagine the feelings of a man who has crossed an ocean, all the while hovering between hope and despair, and at the end of his journey stands at the gate of a palace inhabited by the cruel phantoms of grief and lamentation. Imagine the feelings of a stranger seeking entertainment and hospitality in a palace only to find himself welcomed by white-winged death. Soon the old servant returned, and bowing said, "The mayor awaits you." He led me to a door at the extreme end of a corridor and motioned to me to enter. In the reception room I found a throng of priests and other dignitaries, all sunk in deep silence. In the center of the room I was greeted by an elderly man with a long white beard who shook my hand and said, "It is our unhappy lot to welcome you, who come from a distant land on a day that finds us bereft of our dearest daughter. Yet I trust our bereavement will not interfere with your mission, which rests assured I shall do all in my power to advance." I thanked him for his kindness and expressed my deepest grief, whereupon he led me to a seat and I joined the rest of the silent throng. As I gazed at the sorrowful face of the mourners and listened to their painful sighs, I felt my heart contracting with grief and misery. Soon one after the other of the mourners took his departure, and only the grief-stricken father and I remained. When I too made a movement to leave, he held me back and said, "I beg you, my friend, do not go. Be our guest if you can bear with us in our sorrow." His words touched me deeply, and I bowed in acquiescence, and he continued, "You men of Lebanon are most open-handed towards the stranger in your land. We should be seriously remiss in our duties were we to be less kind and courteous to our guest from Lebanon." He rang, and in response to his summons, a chamberlain appeared attired in magnificent uniform. "Show our guest to the room in the east wing," he said, "and take good care of him while he is with us." The chamberlain conducted me to a spacious and lavishly appointed room. As soon as he was gone, I sank down on the couch and began reflecting on my situation in this foreign land. I reviewed the first few hours I had spent here so far away from the land of my birth. Within a few minutes, the chamberlain returned, bringing my supper on a silver tray. After I had eaten, I began pacing the room, stopping now and then at the window to look upon the Venetian sky and to listen to the shouts of the gondoliers and the rhythmic beating of their oars. Before long I became drowsy, and dropping my wearied body on the bed, I gave myself over to an oblivion in which was mingled the intoxication of sleep and the sobriety of wakefulness. I do not know how many hours I spent in this state, for there was vast spaces of life which the spirit traverses, and which we are unable to measure with time. The invention of man. All that I felt then and feel now was the wretched condition in which I found myself. Suddenly I became aware of a phantom hovering above me, and some ethereal spirit calling to me, but without any sensible signs. I stood up and made my way into the hall, and as though prompted and drawn by some divine force, I walked will-less, as if in a dream, feeling as though I were journeying in a world that was beyond time and space. When I reached the end of the hall, I threw open a door and found myself in a vast chamber, in the center of which stood a coffin surrounded by flickering candles and wreaths of white flowers. I knelt by the side of the bier and looked upon the departed. There before me, veiled by death, was the face of my beloved, my lifelong companion. It was the woman I worshipped, now cold in death, white-shrouded, surrounded by white flowers and guarded by the silence of the ages. O Lord of love, of life, and of death, Thou art the creator of our souls. Thou leadest our spirit towards light and darkness. Thou calmest our hearts and makest them to quicken with the hope and pain. Now Thou hast showed me the companion of my youth in this cold and lifeless form. Lord, Thou hast plucked me from my land and hast placed me in another, and revealed to me the power of death over life, and of sorrow over joy. Thou hast planted a white lily in the desert of my broken heart, and hast removed me to a distant valley to show me a withered one. O friends of my loneliness and exile, God has willed that I must drink the bitter cup of life. His will be done. We are not but frail atoms in the heavens of the infinite, and we cannot but obey and surrender to the will of providence. If we love, our love is neither from us nor is it for us. If we rejoice, our joy is not in us but in life itself. If we suffer, our pain lies not in our wounds but in the very heart of nature. I do not complain as I tell this tale, for he who complains doubts life, and I am a firm believer. I believe in the worth of the bitterness mingled in each potion that I drink from the cup of life. I believe in the beauty of the sorrow that penetrates my heart. I believe in the ultimate mercy of these steel fingers that crush my soul. This is my story. How can I end it when in truth it has no ending? I remained on my knees before that coffin, lost in silence. Then I stared at that angelic face until dawn came. Then I stood up and returned to my room, bowed under the heavy weight of eternity and sustained by the pain of suffering humanity. 3 weeks later, I left Venice and returned to Lebanon. It was as though I had spent aeons of years in the vast and silent depths of the past. But the vision remained. Though I had found her again only in death, in me she was still alive. In her shadow I have labored and learned what those labors were. You, my disciple, know well. The knowledge and wisdom I have acquired I strove to bring to my people and their rulers. I brought to Al-Haris, governor of Lebanon, the cry of the oppressed who were being crushed under the injustices and evils of his state and church officials. I counseled him to follow the path of his forefathers and to treat his subjects as they had done with clemency, charity, and understanding. And I said to him, the people are the glory of our kingdom and source of its wealth. And I said further, there are 4 things a ruler should banish from his realm: wrath, avarice, falsehood, and violence. For this and other teachings I was chastised, sent into exile, and excommunicated from the church. There came a night when Al-Haris, troubled in heart, was unable to sleep. Standing at his window, he contemplated the firmament, such marvels, so many heavenly bodies lost in the infinite. Who created this mysterious and admirable world? Who directs these stars in their course? What relation have these distant planets to ours? Who am I, and why am I here? All these things Al-Haris said to himself. Then he remembered my banishment and repented of the harsh treatment he had meted out to me. At once he sent for me, imploring my pardon. He honored me with an official robe and proclaimed me before all the people as his advisor, placing a golden key in my hand. For my years in exile, I regret nothing. He who would seek truth and proclaim it to mankind is bound to suffer. My sorrows have taught me to understand the sorrows of my fellow man. Neither persecution nor exile have dimmed the vision within me. And now I am tired. Having finished his story, the master dismissed his disciple, whose name was Al-Mutara, which means the convert, then went up to his retreat to rest his body and soul from the fatigues of ancient memories.